Grant Woods, very, very well-known consultant, used to work very closely with a fellow by the name of Brian Kinkle. And Brian was he was a spatial guy like you. Back in the early 2000s, he started playing around with all of their hunting effort, and he created a surface density map in terms of their hunting pressure on a property. And so you had like mountains where they hunted a lot, or dark areas where they hunted a lot, and white areas where they didn't hunt at all. Well, their dark areas, when you look at their map, are right by food plots and this and that. The next year, they made a conscious effort. They said, we're only going to hunt in the spots that we didn't hunt the previous year. They tripled their hunting success. A year later. That's a year later. Those deer remembering from the previous years where they're hunting, because they've been taught when they were fawns, 1.5, 2.5, 3.5. Now you want to go out there and shoot a 4.5-year-old buck. Well, that buck's been educated for 4 years. The previous 4 years has been educated. And then every time you go in the woods, you're giving them the new pattern. How do you hunt relative to that? That's what I do.
All right, Dr. Ditchkoff, I'm excited to be down here talking to you.
Well, welcome to Auburn.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Plains.
Jacob, how are you?
I'm doing great. Every time we come down here, I'm all excited because I know we're going to learn a lot about whether it's deer or turkey. Today we're talking about deer, which always makes for a great conversation. Dr. Ditchkoff, can you give us a little rundown of your background when it comes to deer research and whitetail research of what you've done over the last few decades?
Well, you're aging me now. If I'll go back and do the math, I've been involved in some capacity doing whitetail deer research since, I guess, 1992. I did my master's at the University of Maine, began in 1992, studying the wintering ecology of deer. I wanted to do radio telemetry on deer, wanted to follow animals around. I ended up scooping yellow snow for my master's. Looking at urine and snow as a technique to examine overwintering condition. Winter herds beginning to, go into a phase of severe undernutrition and possible high overwinter mortality. And then following that, I was able to go to Oklahoma State for my PhD. And once again, I wanted to follow animals around with radio collars. And I ended up studying mate selection. Became totally... Loved it. Great. Learned some amazing things. Has led into a lot of the research we do here. And then after that, I was hired in 2001 by Auburn University. I was very fortunate. It's one of the just outstanding program, outstanding university, great town, and it was just a really good fit for me. And I've been here ever since, been doing work with whitetail deer ever since then.
Over the decades of you doing this, has there been any specific notable detail that you've learned that's maybe surprised you about whitetails that you didn't know about before the studies took place?
There's a lot. When, any time that any wildlife biologist, probably forester, probably any scientific avenue, it's a period of exploration that it really allows you to there's a certain degree of intimacy that develops with the data and ownership that you really get to see it, really up close. And it's just, you're constantly surprised by some of the things that you see and it leads you to further questions. And one of the things that, we were talking a few minutes ago that just has always shocked me about deer is how individual they all are. Is we tend to think of these animals out there that they're almost robotic. If this deer on the right does this, then the deer on the left does that too. And we see this, you guys drive down the road, anybody watching this podcast, you drive down the road and for whatever evening, all the deer are out at 3 p.m. And it's like, they all got the memo. So you tend to think that they all operate kind of the same, but when you start putting radio collars on deer and following these things around, they have such distinct personalities and such individuality in the way that they move, the timings that they move. This one travels long distances. This one stays very local. This one prefers bottomland habitat. This one prefers more open habitat. It's just, there's so much individuality. And that's the thing that I've learned is we talk about patterning animals, and I just don't think it translates that easily.
And from the view of a whitetail hunter, that's probably a little disheartening for some people to hear that because it is so individually based on their personality traits and how they use the landscape. Has that changed your perspective or any other hunters that you know of, when they think they start getting a pattern on an animal, how the research has maybe changed that perspective?
It has and it hasn't. I mean, the way I approach hunting has changed with the things that I've learned. But foundationally, it's still the same. It's just at the end of the day, there's an application of, every hunter is trying to apply their knowledge and experience in a way that's going to maximize their benefit. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of luck. I know I've been around some hunters in my past, been fortunate to, that will just make the hairs stand up on the back of my neck with their ability to harvest deer. It was an individual that I was around 25 to 30 years ago for multiple years, that individual would go out with a video camera, a camcorder back then, and sit in for the first 3 weeks of bow season, just sit in the stand and video. Would come back and show us those videos of mature bucks and say, that is the one I'm going to harvest. No baiting allowed, and harvest it with a recurve. Limited to only weekend hunting. And that individual would have 3 weekends left in the season and that individual would shoot that deer with a recurve. 15-yard range. So there are people that have the ability to do this. For the majority of us, there's a lot of luck involved. And I'm one of those. I'm one of the lucky ones.
I would love to talk to that guy.
It really, there's people that are like that out there, and it's uncanny. I think the best examples of it that I can think of is, you take a look at a Kevin Van Dam fishing. They and some of these folks that do this would just say, this is what I need to do, how I need to do it, where and when. And they're able to just read that. And, I've just learned, for me, I think I've absorbed things over time and following enough deer around and studying deer enough to have a feel for, I think this is an evening they're going to be moving. And so I tend to have fairly decent luck like that. But at the end of the day, it's still it's a lot of luck.
So did you grow up hunting? What caused you to get into deer professionally?
I didn't. I grew up wanting to hunt. I grew up watching the one hunting and fishing show that was on television back then, American Sportsman. But, my father was an outdoorsman. He hunted before I was born, really didn't have much of an opportunity to hunt when I was growing up. I grew up in the suburbs of Detroit, but I grew up fishing. Anytime there was an opportunity to go outdoors, my first BB gun, plinking away at chipmunks, and then I had, a couple of aunts and uncles that provided that opportunity to me when I got to college. And I was eat up with it. It was a passion that has never really left me, through all this, even to the age I am today.
And so that kind of drove you into wanting to do research?
Yeah, it did. The time that, that I spent outdoors, we were an outdoors family, camping, or I loved the outdoors. And so, when I went to Michigan State for my undergraduate and I saw there was an opportunity to study wildlife, I grabbed a hold of it with both hands. I said, my goodness, I'm going to be outdoors. And while I'm outdoors working, I'm going to be finding hunting and fishing spots. And that's what I want to do, is go work outdoors. Then I went and got a master's and began to realize that I'm going to spend time at a computer. And then I went and got a PhD, and now all I do is sit at a computer providing the opportunities for my graduate students to go outdoors.
Funny how that works.
Oh, it is. It is.
That's That's interesting. And, Auburn's Deer Lab here, you mentioned it earlier, it is really renowned in the whitetail community. A lot of these southern universities are top notch when it comes to deer research. And you're in charge of the Deer Lab here. Is that correct?
So the Deer Lab is a couple different levels. The Deer Lab is a group of people, essentially, that are working on whitetail deer. They call our deer research facility the Deer Lab. So it just depends upon who you talk to. But I was real fortunate to come work at Auburn University because whitetail deer hunting is an incredible, it's in the culture, it's in the fabric of the Southeast. University of Georgia, Mississippi State have exceptional deer research programs, historically had them. And so there's the ability to propose things, to do work with whitetail deer in the Southeast that you just can't quite do anywhere. And so coming to Auburn was really, really fortunate to be able to land here where there's a passion amongst the hunters, the community, the state, agencies to really fund deer research and answer questions. And so when we got here in 2001, or when I arrived in 2001, I wanted to continue on with the mate selection, reproductive success work that we did during my PhD, and that led to the development of our captive deer research facility in 2007, which is a 430-acre facility designed to study mating strategies and breeding patterns of deer, which, despite the fact that it's a $35 billion industry, up until not too long ago, nobody knew, which deer, was the dominant breeder, which deer didn't breed, that sort of thing. And so we've been working in that facility for 17 years. It's a 430-acre semi-captive, it's totally enclosed facility where we have a population of deer that are able to exhibit natural breeding behavior. And so we can study it because we have intimate knowledge of all those individuals. And so the combination of the work that we do out there, but also work that's funded by state of Alabama. We've worked closely with South Carolina DNR. We've done work at Fort Rucker and other institutions and private properties. There's been an opportunity to study a lot of different aspects of deer.
I looked up a lot of the papers that you've published and was just kind of looking through it, a lot of the subjects, and you've done a lot. But if you had to say what's been your main area of focus when it comes to whitetail deer, what would you say it's been?
If there's a primary area that we've worked, that's kind of predominant over any other area, it's looking at the mate selection type stuff. It's what I did my PhD research on. We've kind of been the leader in that area for the most part. But there's also been a lot of work taking a look at movement patterns. The hunters today, they want information. Where are these deer going? When are they going there? How are they getting there? What time of the day are they moving? When are they most active? So we've had opportunities to really do some neat studies both in Alabama and in South Carolina, kind of examining what are the spatial patterns of these animals. And those are always interesting to look at. You've looked at them, dug through some of our data here several years ago, and you find some interesting patterns. But it's looking at those things that's when I really realized all these animals are so different.
Right.
So different.
So that's one of the things I wanted to get into is I went here to the School of Forestry in like 17 to 2020 or something, right around there. And when I was here, I was good buddies with a master student at the time, Mark Turner.
Yep.
And me and Mark hunted together all the time. We went and hunted some WMAs. And Mark mentioned to me while we were down here, we were hunting a certain WMA, and he was like, they're doing a GPS study out here right now. I'm like, out here? Right now? Really? And I'm sure you know the WMA I'm talking about. And I was like, dude, I got to see that. I got to see I got to learn about this. And fast forward, I guess the study concluded, paper got published. I reached out to you about it, and it was the home range excursion study, I believe. Mm-hmm. And you sent me it, I read it, and the data was attached. And I had a geospatial background from what I did here. So I got that data, and I put it on a map, and I started looking around it. The spots I used to hunt where all these bucks were avoiding me, and I was all over some of these deer and never saw one of them ever. And I was fascinated by it. And we were talking before we got started on here about that study and how I went down the rabbit hole of looking at individual deer. Mentioned one of these deer in particular was bedding up in a pine thicket and going down to a big hardwood drain every night for 27 nights in a row. And I was like, wow, that's crazy. Then you go look at the next one, and he doesn't do anything remotely like that. And you were talking about how you can kind of almost make yourself dizzy looking at the individual deer and what they do versus trying to figure out what they do just in general?
So when I got a real good look at spatial patterns and the individuality of deer was during my PhD. So while I was studying breeding behavior, there was a fellow graduate student that was looking at that. We had radio collars on bucks. We had 50 out at a time, and this was before the GPS collar. This was VHF when we'd have to go out with antennas and locate them. So there was a lot of work, but there was a lot of memory in terms of each individual location. We got to see where they went and what they were doing. And that was the point when I really realized how individual these animals were. At the same time, that property was being hunted. And so there were 6 weekend hunts. It was a military base, and it was McAllister Army Ammunition Plant. Anybody can go look it up. It's the best population of white-tailed deer in the country that the public can hunt, in my opinion. It's a lottery system, but these are tremendous deer. Well, for 6 straight weekends, there would be hunters out there. And what we noticed was there'd be 250 hunters each weekend. These hunters would hunt the same trees. Be new hunters in a weekend, the same trees the next weekend, the next weekend, the next weekend. You could go out there and we'd sit there, and we were poor graduate students, and we'd be out there during the week doing radio telemetry, and at night we'd say, oh my God, look at that line of bright eyes down through the woods. I don't want to have to go to Walmart and pay for bright eyes. I'd go out there with a flashlight, and I'd go pick them all up. We would go pick them up. I wasn't the only one. And the next week, we come by, and it's like, there's a line of bright eyes there again. They lead to the same tree. Weekend after weekend after weekend. So you would go hunt, and as a hunter, you would identify, oh, this is a good spot. You'd go in the next weekend, and you'd say, oh, this is a sweet spot. I'd go in the next weekend, oh my gosh, this is a great spot. We're all seeing the same thing. What you guys just did was you just educated the deer for 2 weekends that there's a hunter here, and then my dumb butt would go hang a tree in the same spot. The deer that you're seeing has learned a pattern. This is where people aren't every weekend on this management area. The people that are hunting these management areas are doing the same things as they were doing on that military base. They're going and hunting the same spots every weekend. Jimmy's going out weekend 1 and hunting that area. Johnny's going out and saying, man, I can see, I have good cover here, I've got the acorns. They're hunting the same location, and they're almost all within 100 yards of a road.
So, as a hunter and a researcher, I mean, how does that strike you? I mean, how does that affect the way that you approach hunting?
Well, you asked the question earlier, and this is probably what I should have said, is the individuality of the deer was always the most shocking to me. But the way my mind has changed with regards to hunting and deer is I hunt what I feel. I think deer move relative to pressure. Deer respond to hunters like water flowing downhill. Every time we set foot in the woods, we are creating some sort of disturbance, either noise, visually, or scent. They're hearing me walk through the woods. Some of them are hearing me, maybe. Some of them might be seeing me. But to me, more importantly, is a bunch of them are smelling me. They might be smelling me as I'm moving through, but more importantly, when I walk into that food plot and I sit in that shooting house and I walk out, how many deer after dark crossed my trail and smelled me? So I hear deer hunters talk about, oh, we don't pull the trigger on food plots until January because we don't want to create any disturbance. Like, well, that game's over. We don't shoot does until such and such. Well, but you've been hunting that same food plot, 14 times over the past 6 weeks. You've created all the disturbance you need. It's not the gunshots creating the disturbance. It's the hunter walking to and from. And so what I've started to do is think about all of my hunting in terms of disturbance and how are deer responding to that. Whether that be the creaky gate when I'm going into my property, whether that be me offloading the four-wheeler to I do have a creaky gate. I don't have a four-wheeler, but just describing the general hunter, offloading the four-wheeler. Well, it's a mile and a half in there, and I don't want to disturb him with the truck. Well, you're disturbing him with the four-wheeler. Well, so-and-so says, I have an electric golf cart. You're disturbing him just the same. They're learning our patterns, whether it be the noises we make, where we hunt, the things that we do. And I think it's fairly simple. This is what these critters do for a living. They avoid getting eaten. And we're just another predator. And they learn to pattern us. Grant Woods, very, very well-known consultant, used to work very closely with a fellow by the name of Brian Kinkle. And Brian was he was a spatial guy like you. Back in the early 2000s, he started playing around with all of their hunting effort, and he created a surface density map in terms of their hunting pressure on a property. And so you had like mountains where they hunted a lot, or dark areas where they hunted a lot, and white areas where they didn't hunt at all. Well, their dark areas, when you look at their map, are right by food plots and this and that. The next year, they made a conscious effort. They said, we're only going to hunt in the spots that we didn't hunt the previous year. They tripled their hunting success. A year later. That's a year later. Those deer remembering from the previous years where they're hunting, because they've been taught when they were fawns, 1.5, 2.5, 3.5. Now you want to go out there and shoot a 4.5-year-old buck. Well, that buck's been educated for 4 years. The previous 4 years has been educated. And then every time you go in the woods, you're giving them the new pattern. How do you hunt relative to that? That's what I do. I don't hunt. On the property that I hunt, I sit on the ground. I'm driving into the woods. I'm driving to the spot saying, okay, what's the wind direction? What's this? What's that? Okay, I'm going to go sit over there, and I'm going to see if I can get these deer moving up out of this bottom. Or I'm going to go sit over there, 200 yards off that food plot, see if I can't get them coming across the back end. Or I'm going to sit on the edge of, you've identified some, I identify areas that tend to be travel corridors by doing that. But what I do is I never hunt the same place twice. So I don't have the highs and lows of other people. I tend to consistently see 2 or 3 or 4 deer as opposed to 10 today and 0 tomorrow.
So you're almost trying to be unpredictable with how you're approaching.
Well, it's how I enjoy hunting, number one. But what I've come to learn is there is an unpredictability about it. It's not me trying to do it. It just happens to be the way I enjoy hunting and saying, I think these deer are doing that, and I'm going to try and get them there. But I also learn the property better. I'll go hunt a food plot, or I'm not seeing anything. I'm going to slide out to that food plot in the last 15 minutes and see if I can see one out there, or something like that. I do hunt some open areas, and I hunt some areas consistently. I will put up a ladder stand. It's like I know deer are moving through there. I'm going to go hunt that spot. Obviously, during bow season, I'll put up stands. It's really hard to hunt from the ground. But I do a lot of sitting on the ground. A lot of sitting on the ground. When I'm hunting my area that I'm allowed to hunt. As when I'm a guest, I'm generally in a stand.
Now, is this something that you've always done, or is this something based off the research is shifted you that way?
It's something that I learned to do. I grew up hunting on a bucket. When I first started hunting, we were hunting cornfields and woodlots. It's like, Steve, why don't you go sit over there? You haul out a 5-gallon bucket. I'd sit on that bucket. But there was great flexibility, so I was comfortable sitting on the ground. And it was Michigan. We could not hunt out of an elevated stand. You had to be on the ground. It could be a blind. It's since changed, but at that time, you had to be on the ground. And so I was just comfortable with that. And it just translated into the way that I hunted here, that I was just like, yeah, I'm flexible. I can go wherever I want, and I've got a rifle. It's 100 yards. If I can't hide 100 yards away, then...
Got bigger problems.
Yeah. And I've been around, there's been some folks that I've been out with, I'm like, sit here, and they're like, I'm not comfortable on the ground. And then after that one hunt, they're like, that was awesome. And I enjoy it. I think you learn your property better. I think you learn movement patterns better because you're moving from spot to spot. And I think you're less predictable to deer. I think you're going to have less highs and lows. Those seasons when warm, wet winters, in the southeast tend to produce low deer harvests. Stuff's constantly growing. The deer aren't as hungry. They're not going on the food plots. Cold, dry winters, we have greater hunter success. I don't experience that. Mine's steady either way. The deer are still moving off the food plots because I'm not on a food plot much.
Going back to when you were talking about the story of the broad eyes and everything on McAllister ammunition plant, do you think that part of the reason why hunters are going to the same spots week after week and they didn't have any association with who was previously there was partly to do also with the habitat and if they were going to be elevated? Because I've seen photos from that place and some of it looks pretty brushy. Do you think that has to be a factor, or do you think it was just naturally based off how the terrain, the habitat was? They just naturally funneled to the same locations?
McAllister, there's a lot of open areas, so you are restricted. In some of the parts of the property, you're very restricted because it's just open grassland. So you're trying to get into those bottoms, and you're restricted in some ways. The areas where we were seeing the bright eyes were the wooded areas. That's where we would see the bright eyes through the woods, and I think what ends up happening is we have the same search image, particularly with bow hunting, is this is a good tree, or this tree's producing. That, and we have a tendency, there's been studies of hunters. Hunters generally don't get more than 100 yards from a road. Whether it's, I don't want to drag it that far, or it's they start to become less secure in themselves, whatever that is. Those hunters that are willing to get off the road, get away from those patterns, those hunters that stay within that 100 yards, they keep hunting the same spots.
All right, guys, we got another in the field tip for you today. One thing we're doing right now while we're out here scouting is looking at overlooked spots and overlooked by us. One thing we always do while we're in the field is using our tracker on onX Hunt to be able to not only see where we've gone, but where we haven't been, and that's what we're going to go look at. So today, we're actually going to work up into a drainage that we haven't been to before. We've walked all around it, but we haven't been up in it. And again, it's a very important factor of using the tracker so you can see where you have been and where you haven't. A lot of times those places you haven't been is your overlooked spots. So if you want to try onX Hunt, you can download onX Hunt today and use the code SOUTHERN and save 20% on your membership.
So it might be the off season, but we're still always thinking about whitetails. And if you're looking to get more mobile this fall and you're looking at saddle setups, the two most common designs you're going to see are a single panel design or a double panel design. They both have their advantages and disadvantages. A single panel design is going to be more comfortable right out of the box, while a double panel design is going to be much more adjustable and customizable to your fit. We always say on the podcast, saddles are kind of like boots. Different people are going to like different things. As a general rule of thumb, I found that heavier set guys typically like a single panel more than they like a double panel. But other than that, it's just really a matter of preference. I personally use both of these saddles. This is the Method 2 from Latitude, and this is the Lone Star from Latitude. I will say that the Method 2 is really nice because it's a two-panel design. It's almost like you have a built-in back band that'll take a little bit of pressure off your back when you're sitting down. But if you're just getting into saddle hunting and you want something that's extremely comfortable right out of the box, the Lone Star is going to be your go-to. It has an advanced hip pinch reduction system in it, so right out of the box, this is going to be very comfortable, and you're not going to have the hip pinch issues that a lot of people have when they first get into saddle hunting. So if you want to be more mobile this fall, check out latitudeoutdoors.com to see these two saddles and a bunch of other mobile hunting gear. We've enjoyed them a lot, and I think you're going to enjoy them too. So outside of turkey calls and a shotgun itself, my favorite piece of gear I've ever bought when it comes to turkey hunting is a red dot sight. My new favorite is the Vortex Viper enclosed red dot. So most of the time, I'm just using the 3 MOA dot. I like just a clean single dot in my sight picture, nice and open sight picture. But I've already run into some situations this season where I'll actually switch to the reticle that is a 3 MOA dot with a 32 MOA circle around it. And the reason I like that reticle is because it allows me to see my nice little point of aim where I'm going to put that dot on the turkey's wattles, but also that circle is going to show me roughly where my pattern is going to go. And for me, it just makes it a little easier to visualize where my pattern is going through the woods, which helps me determine whether or not there's too much brush in front of me, or whether half my pattern's going to catch something between me and the turkey that I don't want it to hit. So I really like that multi-reticle option, and I think you're going to like it too. So to check it out, along with everything else that Vortex offers, head on over to vortexoptics.com, or you can just hit the link in the description of this show. That
is an interesting takeaway, because just thinking about, especially in the deep south, hunting clubs are so popular, and most people, like I hunt a lot of public land. Andrew's in a hunting club, just got a new hunting club like a couple weeks or a week ago. And Andrew, he was talking to the president, and 99% of where everybody's hunting is on a food plot. That's where they kill the majority of their deer. And you go and you look at all these historical shooting houses that are built in. Most of them are off the food plot a little ways, not super far, but off the food plot. But they're historical spots people are consistently going back to and hunting over and over again, and they're easy to get to. One thing that, and we've discussed this before with Dr. Goolsby, we get what we call listener success stories that come in where listeners will submit a story of how they killed a buck using something they heard from a guest on the podcast. And one thing we've had a lot of guests talk about in the past is getting better at your entrance and exit routes, getting into certain spots. Because a lot of people, and you probably dealt with this going on different landowners' property, they might have a really good location on that farm or on that property that sets up great to kill a buck, but their entrance and exit route sucks. There's no other way to put it. This is a terrible way to get in and get out clean. And by just changing that up and focusing on that, people are starting to kill more deer, and that's where we get a lot of our stories from. Do you think that also plays a huge factor for success when it comes to not necessarily being unpredictable to deer, but also being able to hunt a location more than just once and get an opportunity?
I think it does. It's, I've sat back and said, okay, I want to go over there, but how do I get there without disturbing all of these deer? We stop and we think about wind. Okay, when I'm there, how is that going to affect my hunting? But I think it's probably, if I had to guess, I would say 90% of the folks out there, of hunters, don't think about how they're going to get in and out, if not 95%. The majority don't. I mean, that's my spot, that's where I'm going to. The reality is most of our hunters are hunting food plots. They see deer, albeit fawns and yearlings. It's set up to be convenient. It's set up to be comfortable. It's warmer. It's dry. You think there's no disturbance. If you're taking a child or a novice hunter, that's dang sure where you take them. You have a rest. Everything's set up for you, and you go back again and again and again and again. So that's a majority of hunters. Then those that aren't hunting those may not be considering the entrance and exit routes, but it comes back down to disturbance. We've had some really interesting data with disturbance that we've found. So you talk about these folks that hunt these spots again and again. We've done some work in South Carolina. Specifically, our research that we did was at Brosnan Forest. It was a 15,000-acre piece of property that's owned and operated by Norfolk Southern Railway. Gorgeous piece of property. And it's an entertainment and retreat facility where their guests, when they're deer hunting, they will be hunting almost always in a ladder stand on a food plot with a feeder, most cases. Many of these hunters are novice hunters or have limited experience. Some have decent experience. And we did work there we put radio collars on deer, and so we started asking the question, what is the effect of a person hunting a stand on the movement of those deer? And so we had 15 radio collars on bucks for this 1 year that we did this study. And we collected data on any time a stand was hunted. So we knew when stand 32 was hunted, and we knew when stand 38 was hunted. Anytime a stand was hunted, didn't matter if a deer was shot at, anything like that. We didn't record any of those data. Anytime a stand was hunted, there was a decrease in the probability of one of a buck coming onto that food plot during daylight hours, and it lasted for about a week. Just the action, and they would drop these hunters off within about 100 yards or less of their stand. Okay, here's a stand, you need to walk this 150 yards up, it's right up there on your right. They would stay in the stand until the truck pulled up. Morning, evening, whatever it was. The probability of bucks going onto those food plots during daylight hours for the next week decreased just from the action of just from hunting the stand. And you start thinking about that. How often do you hunt a stand twice in a weekend? Mm-hmm. The other thing that we found was with our Alabama study. You mentioned the radio collars that we had out here in Alabama, and this was a study that was funded by Alabama Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. The study that we did in South Carolina was funded by the South Carolina Department of Natural Resources. So the study that was funded by ADCNR, we had GPS collars out on deer on public and private lands. And we decided to take a look at, we had learned from our stuff at Brosnan with regards to disturbance. We started saying, I wonder how day of the week affects it. Because when do you normally go hunting? Saturday, Friday evening, Sunday. And what we found was probability of deer moving. And we defined deer moving as, because we had locations every 30 minutes, that it was like in a new location. The probability of deer moving during the day began declining on Friday. It declined on Saturday, and it hit its lowest on Sunday, Monday morning. Monday morning's worst time to hunt. And then it would begin to climb and peak out around, come up to about normal on Wednesday and Thursday, and then you'd start to see a beginning of a decline on Friday. People are going to the woods Friday afternoon. You're seeing the same pattern, all these hunters in the woods again, the deer sensing the presence of the hunters. They're saying, I'm not moving. I don't know if it's the squeaky gate. I don't know if it's the four-wheelers coming in and out or what it is that the deer are sensing, but they're sensing it. So there's a fellow across the state I know, I'm not going to mention his name, that he was aware of our study, and he said, I'm going to start hunting Thursdays. And he said he shot one of the biggest bucks of his life on a Thursday afternoon. That if I've got an opportunity now to go hunting, and if I could pick any day of the week, well, I'm not that far from retirement. I'm going to be hunting Wednesdays and Thursdays. You can have the weekends. It's the same with fishing on these reservoirs. And
That makes perfect sense.
It does, but it's also, if you sit back and think about it, it's all very, very logical. It's what they do for a living. You know, it's a real simple explanation. I know I keep saying that, but they're real good at what they do.
Now, what does that mean for the weekend warrior, though? The guy that can only hunt a Saturday, maybe a Sunday before church, something like that.
You can only do what you can do. You know, I'm a Sunday, a weekend hunter to a certain degree. You can only do what you can do, but it's also a function of. These were wildlife management areas, these were lease clubs, these were all of these things. What is the pattern on your property? If you're the only one that hunts that property, it doesn't matter when you hunt, in theory. If you're hunting if you have a lease and there's 19 other hunters, boy, I'm going to try and go out Thursday or Friday, but you got to take advantage of whatever you can. I think the other thing is, if every time I go out there is disturbance, man, this is a bad day, but I want to go hunting. But it's a bad day. The wind's wrong. The this is that. Don't go ruin it. Would you be happier going once and harvesting a good quality, having better opportunity? Or would you be happier going out 10 times with less opportunity? And I can't answer that question for the next person. Some hunters are happy just being in the woods. Peace, serenity. Other hunters, it is all about, I need to get that deer and bragging rights or whatever it is, or the pride in getting that deer. I think it depends on your goals.
I'm curious about the study that we keep mentioning here in Alabama. And like I said before, it was the home range and home range excursion study. So you've done a lot of work with that. I'm curious on if that kind of ties in with what we're talking about with the hunting pressure, because I do want to get into whitetail buck home ranges with you, because I know you've done a lot of work on that. So does it tie in?
I don't think excursions are driven by hunting pressure. When we're talking excursions, I'm talking about so a home range. You'll have a deer or you'll have an animal that occupies that. Scientifically, we'll say there's a 95% probability that they are in this area. And think about, any one of the listeners to this podcast, or you guys think about it, you have a home range. It consists of your house, maybe your place of work. It might be where you're taking little Susie or little Jimmy to gymnastics or baseball, the grocery store, whatever that is. Mine involves home, campus, and whatever it is. We all have a home range. But we have times when we go outside of that and we make what we called in that study an extra home range movement. Moving outside, something that's an excursion that's not inside that normally defined area where we're spending time. I don't think our pressure is driving deer out of their home ranges, to make them make these excursions. Rather, I think these excursions are driven biologically. They're driven by dispersal. They're driven by breeding, or they're driven by seasonal patterns. I've seen them for kind of those 3 or 4 different reasons is what we've seen. But I think these deer are really good. Okay, this is my home range. This is where I stay when the temperature gets hot, when there's hunters in the woods and pressure's on. I'm going to go to those spots that I know historically I'm safe from. I can go there. It might just be a little tiny 1 acre, just real thick and nasty that nobody sets foot in. I've seen it I've seen a couple things in Michigan, these little thickets. We used to do little deer drives, and my aunt and uncle would take me and say, okay, we're going to go to this spot. We're going to push through. We're going to see if we can push out. And it's a little 1 acre thicket on the side of a road, so, with a parking lot next to it. And it's like, this isn't deer hunting. Well, there's a big dang deer comes running out of there because it's learned. And we went back there a week later. That deer was in there again. But it learned, it ran out the other side. I think you see these things. But, you're talking about the excursions. We found that young bucks, when they're dispersing, about a year of age, they start to go and establish a new home range away from mama. And they'll go out and they'll begin to go explore. Why they select a certain area, I don't know. We have bucks that are going on that we've seen that they go on these excursions and go explore new areas. I've always felt it's because that buck is having trouble from a competition perspective. Boy, it's tough here. I need to go somewhere else to see if I've got any breeding opportunities. And you might see him we've seen him go on a 2-mile jaunt straight out and then 2 miles straight back. 5 miles out, spend the night, 5 miles straight back. Or go on some sort of loop. But we see them go on these excursions. And then there's a third one that we've seen. We see the females go on excursions. And what we find is there's an increased probability of these females going on excursions in the couple of days leading up to when they go into heat, which I think is they're trying to advertise themselves to as many bucks as possible, which increases the probability of getting a good quality mate.
So with you guys measuring these core areas or home ranges all over the state, because I think it was 2 different WMAs and 2 different timber properties.
Yeah, there were some areas of private property,
and they were all over the state, different sides of the state, like very far apart. Did you see consistency with maybe mature deer of how large their home range typically was?
It's variable. I mean, there's a lot of variability, and you're going to find that home range size is a function of 4 factors. It's going to be a function of sex. Males tend to have greater home range size than females. It's going to be a function of season. It's larger in the winter and the breeding season. It's going to be a function of density. The higher the density, the smaller the home range.
Vegetation density?
A density of deer.
Oh, okay.
Population density. The more deer that are out there, the smaller the home range. So you really see this inside of a high fence. Those high fences, you'll see these bucks, close down to 200 acres. That's all they use up until it's the rut. But they just use 200 acres instead of 600 acres. And then with habitat quality, as habitat quality goes up, home range size goes down. And those are pretty good rules for any species.
That makes perfect sense.
Yep.
And then now with the hunting pressure, time back into it, do you feel like the hunting pressure on any one area would cause a home range to move? Because you'll see people will be like, well, this buck lived over here and then he just disappeared. He changed home ranges. You'll hear that from time to time. Do you think that's factual?
I don't think so. I think they probably, number one is I don't think anybody knows where they're living. We can put out some cameras, but that doesn't mean that you know where, you don't know everywhere they're going, number one. I don't know so much that they're switching home ranges. They might just be using a different portion of their home range a little more as the pressure increases on one side. So if excuse me, if a hunter has 400 acres that they're hunting, that may only be half the area that this deer is using. Or there may be only 200 acres of that 400 acres that buck's actually using, and there's another 500 acres somewhere else that deer's going. And if you really think about it, 600 acres is only a mile across. Even this old guy can walk that in 15 minutes. It takes for a deer, it's nothing to cross that, to cross that home range. So it's not very far. It's just across campus is all that is. So I don't think they're really switching home ranges so much. But I will say, what we have found is they switch home ranges seasonally. I've seen deer winter and summer, the same deer 5 miles apart. During the breeding season, go spend its time in one 500-acre area, and then come spring, go back to its spring-summer range 5 miles away and walk the same path back the next year to the same breeding area home range, and then go back. And I've seen multiple deer that have done this. And so, we don't see him, he's dead. No, he might just be using a different area, his summer home range. I've seen others that shift their home range from year to year and never go back. And these are some dominant individuals. They're all different. So the deer you see on your property this year, he may not be back, but it may not be because he's dead.
Yeah, I got a deer like that.
Does habitat play a big factor in that? As in, is there any correlation at all with quality habitat, with the size of an excursion?
I don't know. Nope. I don't think anybody's really looked at that. The excursions are hard to measure, and really that stuff that we published, that was with a graduate student, Todd Jacobson. I think everybody had been, and this may be a little arrogance on my part, but I think everybody had been measuring excursions wrong. So we did it a different way, and what we did was, what everybody had been doing before was putting together all the locations for that deer and said, this is the home range, but in the middle of that time, you're measuring whether or not it went outside of that. Well, I don't think you can actually measure the excursion, because that excursion is actually part of the home range you constructed. So we did it differently. We just looked at the previous 60 days of use and was checking to see if they went to a new area compared to the previous 60 days. So ours was a little bit different in the way we looked at it, but nobody's really looked at this stuff. It's just, it hasn't been important to people.
Would you have a theory on that by any chance, or any thoughts on that?
Thoughts on what exactly?
On quality habitat affecting positive or negative to shifting of home ranges and or extensive excursions?
If an animal has the resources available to it, it doesn't have any reason to go elsewhere. And if you go back to the reasons I said they're going on excursions, it's because of resource limitation. Number one, a juvenile buck, a year-old buck, needs a new area that is not its mother's. I need new space. A doe is going and looking for breeding opportunities, resource. And three, a buck going out and looking for breeding opportunities, limited if it's a lower quality buck, limited opportunities for breeding. If there's limited resources, they are going to go look for it. But you kind of think about this as, well, the neighbor puts out all my deer leave because my neighbor's corn is feeding corn, so I have to feed corn. Well, just because your neighbor put out corn doesn't know that your deer know about it. It's not like there's a message board that says, yo, there's corn over here. They have to know it's there somehow. So they have to have wandered over there. Now, we talk about these excursions. In the study that we did at Brosnan Forest, we had 2 bucks that all of a sudden, they went 5 miles, they went off the property, and they went to a soybean field. They didn't smell it. That's not how they had been there at some point in their life before, at that time. I don't know if that was their natal home range, or they had learned it from another deer and followed them out there, or one of these bucks knew it and the other one just followed them. But one of those deer had known that field was there last year or the year before, and that's why they're going. Quality. There's a quality resource there that I want that's not available where I am.
So and we're going to get off kind of the hunting pressure aspect of this conversation, but from a person who owns property and can manipulate a habitat on property, what should that tell them about how they should focus on that property based off like that amount of research?
Well, I'm going to go back to pressure and habitat. I'm going to combine the pressure and the habitat. What resources are deer going to value on your property? There's 3 things. It's food, it's mates, and it's lack of pressure. We always worry about food. Well, I need corn feeders and I need food plots. You want to increase the way bucks move on your property, attract does, but at the same time, I think you shoot them. Because the more does you have, the easier it is for them to lock on bucks. You want them searching for them. But number 3, to have areas on your property that are where there's no pressure. A sanctuary, 5-acre thicket that you never set foot in. That deer knows I have never smelled a human in here. Little 10-acre thicket over there, a 2-acre thing. You never go in there except to retrieve a wounded deer. You don't go looking for sheds. You don't go. Now you've provided the 3 things that a deer is looking for during hunting season: food, mates, and security. That's what I look at from a habitat perspective. I was on the phone with the guy yesterday calling, how should I set this up? I said, you got 100 acres. I can't help you. There's nothing you can do. You're at the mercy of your landowners. But what you can do is you can make them feel safe there. That's the way I would approach it from a habitat perspective.
Yeah, and that ties into what we were talking to Dr. Goolsby about before. We had a listener Q&A episode a couple weeks ago, and we had people asking about, especially in the Deep South, you have an abundance of food and cover on a lot of properties in the form of like pine thickets, cutovers, whatever. It might not be the best food or cover, but there's a lot of it around. So what can you do? Like, how do you key in on the deer? And what I was telling Dr. Goolsby a little while ago was I felt like it came down to just hunting pressure, kind of exactly like what you're talking about. Really, that's anybody can control that, whether you're hunting a little bitty parcel that you own or that you have permission on, a hunting club, or even a WMA if you're hunting a piece of public land and you found something that maybe not a lot of people are going into. You can control that pressure, so if you're really careful about it, you could maybe find some of those little sanctuaries, right?
I think so. It's one of my counterparts, over at another university, there's kind of some legendary stories about him being invited to go hunting, and he'd always hunting clubs and we'll put you in this. No, I don't want to bother you. I don't want to be a bother. Just tell me a place that some thicket you guys don't go into. I'll go over there and I'll be out of your way. Well, they want to put him on their beautiful food plot, and he's just like, no, I don't want to be a bother, but at the same time, I don't want to hunt that dang food plot that you've been hunting every weekend. That's a waste of my time. Find me the nasty thicket. I'll go sit there. I'll be happy. I'll be out of your way. He would shoot a big buck every time. So he never gets invited back anywhere.
What a legend.
But, those deer on those properties, that has changed the way I think about deer hunting.
I'm very interested in asking you this. How often, especially like I say a hunting club, can a buck I'm going to try to reword this. Is it possible for a buck to live on like a hunting club where there's trail cameras, there's feeders, there's food plots, and go fairly unnoticed without people
Yes.
really seeing them?
Yes. So we have a 430-acre deer research facility. We have 3 feeders that are protein feeders. We have 3 or 4 in any year corn feeders, and we dart at these stands from October through March. In addition, we put out once or twice a year, depending upon the year, we will run a survey of our deer. We'll put out some corn piles and put cameras on those corn piles. We will have bucks go a year in 430 acres with 3 or 4 darters in tree stands Monday through Friday and cameras up for a couple weeks of the year, and us never see a deer but then see it again the next year. Now, is it possible that it burrowed under the fence and came back in? Yes. Is it possible that it jumped the fence and came back in? Yes. Deer can clear an 8-foot fence. We know they get out sometimes. We know that they're not coming back in. These deer will go unknown. Now, generally, I don't believe we've had one that's gone 2 years without being seen, but for a year. And we monitor ours pretty closely, and I would argue closer than what any hunting club really is in most cases.
And also on the darting thing, one of my best friends when we lived down here was a darter with you guys. And
Who was it?
Colton George.
Okay.
And y'all dart at night too, correct?
Dart guns, night vision scopes.
Yeah. And so even at night, you can't get a hold of these things sometimes.
No.
He was talking about how hard it was.
Well, I mean, it's... Yeah, I won't lie. I'm not the one sitting in these tree stands anymore. You know, if I didn't dart another deer the rest of my life, it wouldn't break my heart. Okay, that's where I am with that. But these deer will walk in and go. They know there's somebody sitting up there. How bad do they want to eat? And you know, and our darters have learned, it's like, okay, don't turn this on, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. They're wise. They're wise. If you think that they peg you bow hunting, well, it's a whole other thing with these feeders have been in the same spot for 17 years.
Generational knowledge.
It is generational knowledge, but they're always walking away from it.
Yeah. But going back to just like that example, that's amazing that a buck could go a year without being seen with people in the place, darters, cameras, all of that. And it makes you think, and for the audience members as well, on your hunting club, you don't think you have a great buck on camera, and there's a chance there could be multiple mature bucks, great deer on that property that you've never seen, or you only see him once a year and you think that buck just came from 5 miles away, but he's been on that place just because there's so much ground that he could be
Well,
at.
it's not the norm. It's definitely not the norm. But yeah, that deer could be there, number one. Number two is you might be right on the edge of that animal's home range as well, and it's going to expand. And it's going to change as the breeding season, moves. It's a resource availability thing. Boy, I've been walking these same scrapes for the last 2 weeks, and there's just no does available. I need to check something else out. They may not be coming from 5 miles. They may just be coming from 500 yards. And so it's that there's the luck part. We've gone full circle. What I said earlier, there's a lot of luck involved in this. Are you out there on the day that deer, is coming and checking things out? I would rather hunt a spot where I've seen a deer before. I think my odds are better. But there's a lot of stories. I've never seen that deer before. I've never seen that deer before. So I think that's what makes it fun. I just not knowing what you're going to see each time you go out in the woods.
And it also goes back to when you're talking hunting pressure. If you're historically hunting, like say on hunting clubs, would be one of the greatest examples. Members are constantly hunting the same food plots over and over and over again. It's so easy for multiple generations of deer, specifically not just the does, but bucks too, to learn how people are getting to those stands. And it's not like there's a conversation here between intelligence and conditioning, and a lot of people say like whitetails may have a high intelligence, or bucks have a higher intelligence, but also I think it's a lot of conditioning. Like if they see, hear, or smell something in a certain spot that they perceive as a danger, they're not going to go there until they feel comfortable, which could allow you to go weeks without having sightings. Same thing with trail cameras and all that kind of stuff. And it makes you wonder on a lot of these properties how many missed opportunities are happening because people continue to keep going to the same spots instead of changing up. And then also constantly scouting and finding new areas that those deer feel very comfortable in and try to go into that first time and try to have an opportunity at them.
And that's where I think, is being flexible and mobile with your hunting on property is you're learning these travel corridors. It's not so much that you're going in and disturbing them where they're bedding, but you're starting to say, those deer are always moving down this hill. It doesn't matter where they're coming from. I just know that they're going down this hill in the morning, and 2 out of 3 days, I will see deer coming through here going to a bedding area, or vice versa. And if that's true, then all I have to do is hunt that thing several times, and I'm seeing different deer each time. I don't want to hunt it every day, but it's like, boy, the wind's right. That's the travel corridor I want to go to. Oh, it's a different wind. I wanted to hunt there, but nope, I better go hunt that other one over there. Or, boy, my wind's wrong for both of them. I'm going to go hunt that food plot today.
Do you have any stories of any outliers when it comes to GPS data from bucks that caught you off guard based off what they were doing?
I haven't had the luxury of looking at the GPS data as much the graduate students do, but I looked at I chased those deer around in Oklahoma, and it wasn't the GPS, but we had a deer that we captured him at the front gate at McAllister. There was a food plot right there. We captured him on that food plot. And because it's at the front gate, this is 200 yards from the perimeter of the base. In 3 years of following this deer around, not once did that deer ever cross the fence that we're aware of. It was a barbed wire fence, just like a cattle fence. Yet we saw that deer within 10 yards of that fence half a dozen times. And the home range of that animal was long and linear along that fence. And I think it's because of the pressure outside. There's people in the McAllister Army Ammunition Plant. There was no people in that woods. This was not an active military base. It was an ammunition production and storage. So the production was in confined areas, and the storage was in bunkers. There was nobody out in the woods except during the hunting season, during those couple of weekends. So there wasn't regular disturbance. But outside the fence, there was regular human disturbance, that sort of thing. And that deer was long and linear, about 2 mile length, the overall home range over those 3 years, but all along that fence and only about a quarter mile wide.
Wow.
That's wild.
It's just, I can describe for you all sorts of different scenarios that we saw with that. And it's just, with the GPS collars, you don't get that because it only lasts about 9 months. And then what we do is we tend to get lots of locations just during the breeding season. We don't know how to compare it from year to year. These deer are pretty savvy with regards to how do I position myself to be successful.
Yeah, and I think that also just goes back to they're all individuals.
They are.
Just weird shaped home ranges in some cases.
The biggest buck that we ever radio collared, he was 177 inches at 6.5 years old when we captured him. When he was 7.5, we already had the radio collar on him. He was bigger. Was he 185, 190? I don't know. We got some glimpses, some looks at him, but he was bigger. That deer over over 3 seasons, when he was the 7.5, he spent his breeding season in a 600-acre area, and so he had to be one of the dominant deer out there. The next season, he was a section over. The next season, he was a section over. Multiple hunters came in. We had radio collars, ear tags came in, and I saw this deer. Show a picture, say, that was him Well, we knew where that deer was, and we knew he was moving, and okay, where was your stand? Oh, it was over here. Okay, here's that deer. They saw him 3 years, and this was the most heavily hunted area of the base. Never shot him. And he was 6, 7, and 8, or 7, 8, and 9 during those 3 years that we had a radio collar on him. But yet he was moved, different section of land, you know. I'm assuming your hunting club is about 600 acres, 1,000 acres.
It's 3,900 acres.
Oh, okay. Well, then
We got space.
yeah, you do. But most of these sections is a section of land. Most hunting areas, 640 acres. Well, imagine your 177-inch deer, or whatever it is, and say, "Boy, we didn't get him. He's going to be here next year. He might be on the next property." Well, imagine you being the one saying, "I think I want to let him age one more year," and you passed him up. But he's over on the next one, then he's over on. They're all different, but I've had other deer that never left that 600 acres. It's right on top of one another every year. I always thought it was the shifting in the acorn availability. That's why we went from more upland acorns to more bottomland acorns the next year. I don't know. I can't give you the reasons, but
The thing I could imagine as being a deer researcher, biologist, or specializing in this, is it leads to more questions than answers a lot of times. Would you say that's accurate?
It is. But I think more importantly than that, yes, we walk out with a lot of questions, say, I wonder about this and I wonder about that. And unfortunately, we usually can't go examine them because we're limited in terms of time and money. We have, Agency X comes to us and say, we want you to answer questions A, B, and C. Okay, so we're focused on A, B, and C. I really want to answer this question over here because 5 years ago, I've seen this happen multiple times, but they're just not paying us to do that. So it's hard to really do that. But the other part is it's just there's so much we just don't understand. What I have learned is talking with people, deer enthusiasts, to say, boy, deer do this. And it's like, no, they really don't. Not from what I've seen. And it's what it's made me realize is there's just so much we just don't know. And even when I catch myself saying, well, this is true, and then I say, no, I don't know that I have any data to support that. And I think that some of the greatest evidence of that is turning on the television and watching hunting shows. This is what the deer are doing, and I'm going, I don't think so. These folks are real good at what they do. They're real good at what they do. But sometimes I hear some things that I'm just like, I don't agree.
Speaking on what some hunters might believe, where are you at on the moon?
We just published our second paper on moon phase stuff. Moon phase charts are based upon data that were developed with fish. We know the moon affects tides. And if you're a coastal fishery, we all know that strongly affects the way fish are moving and the way fish are feeding. Particularly along river systems or mangroves where you've got water running in or running out. Running in or running out, the fish are real active. When it's, a slack tide, low or high, it really dies down. Does that affect deer? So we looked at it. What we found was peaks in activity that were associated with the periods of activity that were predicted, but in multiple cases, it was the opposite. This is a period that should be high deer movement. We were finding that to be our lowest deer movement. And I'm going off memory here. Don't take this. There is something to lunar charts, but it's not exactly what they're predicting. There's some flaws in it, and we studied it with the original stuff was with South Carolina deer. We looked at it again with Alabama deer, and we found the same pattern of there's something to this, but our pattern wasn't exactly the same as we saw in South Carolina either. There's something to it. Moon overhead, moon underfoot, moon rise, moon set. those periods, and it really it's influencing deer, but how it is, I don't know. So I think sometimes if you follow it, it's really going to help you, and other times it's not going to as much.
Some people love the conversation. Some people hate it. It's always fun to ask guys like yourself about this because, like we started out the conversation with, we're talking about you'd be driving down the road 3 p.m. It's like, wow, all the deer. They all got the memo. They're all moving. And like I said, we've interviewed Dr. Bronson Strickland about this with the research they just did. And he basically was like, no, the moon doesn't do it. But it's still you can't help but wonder when you're driving around and you're seeing them all over the place. I'm like, why are they all moving right now?
Well, keep in mind, and I don't know exactly what Bronson had done, but if it was just moon, that's different than the lunar charts that we were looking at, that's going to count for sun and moon. So I got real excited about that stuff, and so we had a graduate student take a look at and try and tie in weather patterns and seasonality into all this. I'm like, we're going to develop a model that tells you when deer move. Oh, what a mistake that was. There's so much data, there's so much variability, and there's so many things going on that it's like it just becomes a mess. At the end of the day, it's just, I don't know what's driving all of this. And anybody that tells me they have it figured out, that's when I start to go, you're just smarter than me, I guess. I don't know.
Or what are you selling?
Yeah, to some degree.
Yeah, and it's so complex. Again, just the animal itself is so complex. The weather, the moon and sun, like there's so many things that go into it. I wonder, I'm like, could we ever even know it? Is it even possible to really know?
Do you want to?
That's the other part.
That's the other part of this. Do you want to? At what point, it's fun trying, but do you really want to have that information to say, I know this deer's going to be walking through there at this time. Yeah, once, but twice? What about 10 times? It's like, this isn't fun anymore. That's the other part of this. And when you take the mystery of it away and you take the challenge of it away, why are we out there?
I'm glad you said that and brought that up because, technology, it's moving fast. We spent a lot of time last year, the year before that, talking about some concerns over like thermal drones getting more affordable, more people having thermal drones. We, through the grapevine, have heard about some issues that have been happening in Alabama with people using them to go hunt for deer and turkey. So there's that. But then also with just all this data, and like not to go too far down the rabbit hole, but with AI and everything coming out, it's like, is it going to be possible in 5-10 years to like really know that? And is someone going to build a company around it and put it out there for everyone to see?
I've worked with some companies, developed some good relationships, and kind of help them from sitting on the side, my armchair, giving them my opinion on some things as they've been working through some of these sorts of programs, predicting deer movements and such. And it's, I've worked closely with the guys at Spartan Forge. I believe in what they're doing. I believe in why they're doing it and how they're trying to do it. And, I think they're being really fair and honest with what they've found. But at the end of the day, I don't think there's going to be many tools like that you can develop that are really going to tip the scales significantly. I think they'll help you. I think they'll help the really smart hunter go, okay, I can increase my chances a little bit if I do this there at that time. But you still don't know these individual animals. And where these bucks moving is a function of where those does decide to go, and whether or not that doe got pushed by a coyote and decided to go a different direction, or whether or not there's so many factors at play that you keep going back to Vegas. The house is going to win. The house is going to win. I think there's a few folks out there that have an uncanny ability to know what these deer are doing. I mentioned a fella at the start. I'll never be that person, and I don't know that I want to be that person. Carl Miller, you guys know who he is. University of Georgia, retired, just wonderful person, super smart, has probably forgotten more about deer than I'll ever know. He and I were talking at a meeting one time, and it's about all this quality deer management stuff, and I need to estimate the number of deer, and I need to shoot the right amount, and I need to the management part of it is, he's like, we're taking all the fun out of this. I can't shoot this deer, but I can shoot that deer, and I can't shoot. And there's a part of it that people really enjoy that aspect of it in the planning, but there's also where we were looking at is like, I just want to go out to the woods. I'd like the opportunity to harvest a big deer and match wits, but I just want to go to the woods, and I don't want to shoot a big one every time.
Yeah, that's another thing we've been talking about more. We get a lot of requests. We talk a lot about hunting mature deer, hunting big bucks, but we get a lot of requests where people are like, can y'all just do some episodes on how to just get good at deer? Like, I want to go out and shoot some does. Let's do some doe episodes. And that hunger is there. Like, people want that. And I think that's great. I think it's a really positive thing for us to see, for what we do.
I think it is. I think the pendulum's going to swings a little bit. There was, if you take a look at, max in the 70s and 80s, maximum sustained yield. That was the style of hunting in Michigan. If you saw your buck, we had a 16-day gun season. If you saw a buck, you shot it, and everybody would ask, "Did you get your buck?" Wasn't did you get a booner? Did you get a big one? Did you get a mature? But did you get your buck? Because that deer was so important for the freezer. And then it evolved into, with cable television, then all of a sudden we had all these hunting and fishing shows. And, today it's podcasts. And, boy, I would like the opportunity to shoot a big one. So then QDM came around, and let's pass up does. I want to shoot a big one. I want to shoot a big one. I want to shoot a big one. And I think there's probably part of that. For some people, it's swung a little bit that it's like, I don't need to shoot a big one. I want to go out there and hunt. I want to enjoy the experience. I just want to do it my way. And I think it's going to wobble in there a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Find that happy medium.
Yeah. I mean, your podcast, you're educating hunters. They're saying, I'm going to take this, but they're also getting, everybody that listens to your podcast is probably getting it from a dozen other different locations, from word of mouth, from books they're reading and magazines and websites and all this stuff. And then you get to a point, it's like, gosh, this is becoming work. I just want to go hunt.
Yep. Got to keep it fun.
One thing I want to ask you about that can be controversial, but I want to get your take on it is, what is your thoughts on the discussion of culling deer, culling bucks? Because we see this a lot on hunting clubs and social media and everywhere else, TV. Science behind it, if there's any science behind it or not, what's the thought behind, from a research standpoint, of culling deer?
Well, I think that's coming from television. You hear about a management buck, a cull buck, this and that, and I'm not going to speak to the situations and where they're hunting because I'm not there. I think for your regular hunter, a cull buck does not exist, or I don't think it should exist, and here's why. Generally speaking, that cull buck is, that one has bad antlers. Either maybe it's a normal rack on one side and a spike on the other. I think is the classic example. Spike on one side. And they're like, well, I don't want that deer. I don't want it contributing to the genetics. Well, first of all, that's not genetics. That's probably pedicle damage. If it hadn't damaged the pedicle when the antler shed, it would have had two normal ones, and you would have said, oh my goodness, that's a trophy. So if that's true, then it has the trophy genetics, even if it's a spike on one side and the normal one on the other. Number two, they sit here and say, well, I want to get rid of it because it's eating food that my other deer could eat. It's one deer. If you have a nutritional problem in your herd, then go shoot a doe. Eliminate that doe. I think that buck provides benefits by being out there. The majority of the properties that we hunt, most hunters hunt, have an underabundance of mature bucks. When you have more mature deer, they provide social stability. They are more efficient at breeding. They suppress breeding by younger males. They're more efficient at breeding, meaning they get more of the does bred in their first cycle. What that means is you have less late-born fawns. If you have less late-born fawns, those are individuals that are never going to catch up. So I've compressed the breeding season. I've moved it earlier. I've suppressed breeding of younger bucks, which means they are potentially coming out of the rut in better condition, greater survival and greater antler growth for the following year. Mature bucks are better able to figure out amongst themselves who has the best genetics, as opposed to a bunch of adolescent deer running around. You know, is this spike better than this spike, higher quality genetics? Or is this spike better than this forkhorn? Well, this spike might just be a late born. It might actually have better genetics than this 4-point over here. You can't figure that out. It's like a bunch of 13-year-old boys. Which one is actually going to grow up to be the linebacker in the NFL? Well, you don't know because, they're just 13 years old. You'll know it when they're in college. So your genetics, I think what ultimately happens is your genetics improve. All by having those mature bucks on your property providing social stability. I think the only people that should be culling are those that have an overabundance of bucks. Who has that? Inside of a high fence.
That's about it, right?
And this is where I come back to. I think it's an excuse to pull a trigger. Number one, I think that's what they're doing on TV, so that's what I should be doing. I don't think it's beneficially advantageous. They did a study out in Texas. They did this for 5 years, where they said, we're going to alter the genetics of our antlers in our population by shooting this. They did nothing. You're not, I don't believe you're positively affecting your deer herd. If it makes you feel better, shoot it. But I don't think you're positively affecting your deer herd.
I agree I think a lot of people use it as excuses to pull the trigger, but also genetics come from both the doe and the buck, correct? So
Yep, it's 50-50, and that's not genetics. You know, we published a paper on that. You know, 75% of those we had people send us your spike on one side. 75 to 80%, we could see the damage to the pedicle. And there's also something called contralateral antler malformation. Leg injuries will cause malformed antler on one side. And there's a study out of Texas from I think it was the 70s or the 80s, maybe it was the 80s, where they found a good high percentage of those malformed antlers were attributed to front leg injury on the same side, hind leg injury on the opposite side. Former gunshot wound or previous broken leg or something like that.
That's really fascinating about the social stability aspect. That's not, I haven't heard a lot about that. That is super, super interesting.
And you'll find your breeding season will move a little bit earlier, but you'll get rid of your late-borns. You'll compress your rut. You'll have a better hunt.
The late born being the fawns being born so late in the fawning season that it just doesn't have time to catch up. It's basically a runt.
Yeah, because when the males are much more efficient at breeding the does in their first cycle. Mature males are. The immature males are not. So if you've got immature males, I don't know if it's females saying, this isn't going to work, I want to hang around for a mature male. Well, they cycle back in 28 days later. So here in Alabama, you know, first week of August is when we have our fawns, most of our fawns hitting the ground. Now we've got fawns hitting the ground first week of September. The rest of the country, first week of June. Now you have fawns hitting the ground first week of July. It's not that big a deal here in Alabama or Georgia, Mississippi, but in Maine it sure is. 1 less month before winter, They're not going to make it. I want those mature bucks getting the breeding done.
That makes a ton of sense. And it's not a big deal down here because forage availability and also it just doesn't get that cold.
But they don't catch up either. You know, another study we did, there was a former graduate student here. She worked with my predecessor she developed an ability to take a look at the teeth of 1.5-year-old deer and determine, based upon eruption of the last molar, determine the month that it was born. So there's a formula. Well, we went in and did a study. The month of birth date strongly affected antler size in the first year. Late-born fawns, spikes. Early-born fawns, 4 points and 6 points.
That's the first rack they're throwing is a 6-point rack.
Some of them, yeah. I mean, you still have some spikes.
Right.
But the percentage that were fork antlered, far greater for your early-born fawns than your late-born fawns. Data with red deer out of Europe show that once they're behind, they never catch up. They're never going to achieve the same as these ones that were not behind.
That was going to be my follow-up. So even year 3, 4, 5, 6, they're still not going to be what they could have been.
I don't have data on it, but I have seen data that were published. That their studies showed that the majority of these deer, once they're behind, they never catch up. But if you factor in that wildlife live on the edge of undernutrition, you've never seen an obese animal. Okay? They're living on the edge of undernutrition. They may have a season of plenty, but they need all of that to make it through the lean stretches. If you subscribe to the fact, and this is one of the things I try and teach my students, wildlife lives on the edge of undernutrition. Well, deer are wildlife. So if they're living on the edge of undernutrition, how can you ever catch up? If you're behind, how can you get the resources to catch up? We cannot think of them like a human. They don't have a pantry. They don't have a freezer. They don't have DoorDash.
Does supplementation of minerals or food plots, can that move the needle in a local deer herd?
Food plots, yes. But it's going to move the needle over years, not so much in the short term. Everybody says, I didn't see anything. Well, a 4-year-old deer is going to get a benefit of a bump of nutrition. And can you really tell the difference in a 3-inch, let's say, and I'm making this up, but if there was 3 inches average bigger in antlers on your property, or 5 inches, 5 inches is 5 inches. But would you be able to tell? I don't think so. But after 5 years, to have a fawn while it was in utero, mama has much better nutrition. It's born into good nutrition. There's more milk. It's a leader in terms of its high quality, in terms of it's ahead of the game. It translates into 1.5-year-old, 2.5-year-old, 3, 4-year-old. That might make a 20-inch difference, as opposed to just 5 inches in 1 year. So there's a lot of people say, well, I paid for it, I didn't see an effect. Well, you only did it for 2 years. You asked minerals. I do not believe you will see a difference in antler size with minerals. There's no data that shows that. Mineral supplementation is not going to increase antler size. I do think there's benefits. I just don't know where the benefits are. If the deer are eating it, there's a benefit to it. But maybe it's physiological. Keep in mind, antler growth, it's not mineralization. That's all protein and cartilage. The minerals, calcium, phosphorus, that's coming after the antler growth is done. So by supplementing those is not making your antlers bigger. It's allowing them so that these deer go through a state of osteoporosis when the antler hardening process. Maybe they can fill in their mineral stores quicker, but it's not affecting antler size. Maybe birth rates are a little bit higher because mineral balances are good. Maybe there's some other physiological things that enhance immune function, or I think there's benefits. I just don't think it's in the ways that we look.
That's an excellent point. As a That's interesting. Also, what about high protein supplement feed? Because I know, of course, deer are browsers,
I think there's huge benefits to it.
even in a non-high fence population.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think anything that you can do to supplement nutrition, whether it be food plots or pelleted feed, is going to have benefits. I think the biggest thing is you got to realize that's if you keep the density at the same. If you're nutritionally supplementing your herd, you're going to have greater survival, greater reproductive success, all of these things, but you still need to keep it at that same density. It may not be much of a change in density, but those deer will adjust their density relative to carrying capacity. And really what I'm talking about is the number of does.
So you got to harvest more if you're going to put that
You
food
might
on
have to.
Yeah.
You might have to.
Yeah.
It might not be many more, but if you have 30 deer per square mile and you increase to 33, you're saying, well, that's no big deal. That's 10% difference in food availability. 3 deer. How many pounds will I put on if I increase my food intake by 10% for the next 6 months and don't change my exercise patterns?
More than you'd like.
Yeah, you'd probably have to roll me. I'd be taking the elevator, not the stairs.
And if I don't know if I have the exact number, but doesn't like a mature doe need like 2,000, 2,500 pounds of forage a year, roughly, something in that ballpark?
There's multiple numbers out there because it's done on wet weight, it's done on dry weight. They tend to talk about, I've seen the number 2 pounds and I've seen the number 4 pounds per day. Let's just say it's 3 times 365. You're looking at 900. You're looking at 1,080, 1,090. I'll call it 1,100 pounds of just at 3 pounds. So if it was 4 pounds, you're looking at 1,400 pounds of food. Yeah, there's a fair bit.
Yeah, and just by adding a couple extra deer, I mean, that's even, you might need 3,000 pounds more for it, 3 more deer. And that's like probably not, that's like minimum or baseline, probably what they need, depending on it.
Yeah, it depends on the quality. It depends on the quality of the food. But here's the other thing that people don't factor in is when people buy into like quality deer management, say you need to lower your deer density. If you lower your deer density by 10%, you probably lower your sightings by 20%. If you lower it by 20%, you probably lower your sightings by 50%. They're not hungry. They're not as hungry. They don't come out as early. They're sitting here saying, I don't need to step out on that food plot right now. That fawn is not as hungry. And it's that fawn's running out there and the doe's going, I got to go with it. Your deer sightings are going to go down, and it doesn't go down proportionally.
That's interesting. I've never thought about that. Never heard anybody talk about that either.
Yeah, I don't have data on it, but if you do the math based upon food availability, they're not as hungry. If you cut it by 10%, there's 10% less deer to see. But they're not as hungry. They're not going to step out as much.
Yeah. Have you ever seen a property or a landowner where they actually did harvest too many does or too many deer and actually saw like a large negative effect from it?
Yes.
Really?
We did research down at Fort Rucker.
Okay.
And there's a couple of examples that are similar. Fort Rucker in the late 90s, early 2000s really bought into this quality deer management philosophy of you can't shoot too many does. This was really kind of before your guys' time. I would get phone calls and they'd say, hey, how many does should we shoot? And I'd say, quote unquote, you need to shoot every one you see plus a few more. And I'd pat myself on the back for being such a good consulting biologist. There was a lot of that going around because we had deer number problems. That was generally the issue. And Fort Rucker really bought into we need to manage this herd, and they were shooting a lot of does. They really lowered their deer numbers. They had been harvesting, and don't quote me on these numbers, Fort Rucker's like 50,000 acres. They were harvesting about 50 deer a year around 2010, 2008. I think it was about 2008 when they contacted us and said, we have a problem. We need to know what's going on. This was at the time when coyote numbers were increasing. Coyote just arrived in Alabama in the 60s. You know, they're not native to Alabama, they're a plains species. We got rid of the wolves, they expanded east. They really just arrived in Alabama in the 60s. And we don't think it was until the late 90s, 2000s, 2010 maybe, that we really began to saturate the landscape. And people started talking about coyotes are killing all the fawns, and all the studies said, your fawns are fine. They eat some fawns, but fawn survival's fine. All the data had said it. Well, all the data was from the 80s, and we hadn't factored that in. They contacted us, and they said, hey, Auburn, we need you guys to come look at this. So we looked at fawn survival. Those coyotes were hammering those fawns, and they had driven the population down. So they had what's called a predator pit, which is a theoretical population level scenario, where if you drive a population down, if some cause, it was designed with in northern climates over winter survival. If winter mortality for bad winters for a couple of years drives a population down, normally you think it pops back up to carrying capacity. Well, in a predator pit theory says the predator might be able to hold it at this lower threshold level now. If it gets low enough, then they can control the system. And we think that's what was happening there. All of a sudden, they drove it down, and this was harvest driving it down. They drove it lower than they wanted. You have this increase in coyotes at the same time that the population's coming down. Now all these coyotes on the landscape are just tagging these fawns at a far greater rate than they'd ever been before. And all of a sudden, the population couldn't recover. They came in and started having to do things. No doe harvest. We need to be trapping coyotes. We need to be doing different things. So yes, we've seen things, and there's other places have seen similar scenarios. You can recover from it, but it takes a little bit of effort to get out of that low point.
Wow. Okay. That's impressive. Again, I haven't heard that before, so that's why I was wondering. I never heard where someone actually killed too many, and it's all a huge.
They were shooting one deer per 1,000 acres.
I thought Rucker was known for having a lot of deer, but that I don't know if it's recovered.
And I'm not real familiar with what Rucker has today, but I know Rucker's recovered significantly.
Right.
Rucker was known for a place to go shoot deer. But in the early 2000s, those numbers, and it was, some would say it's bad management, some would say it's good management. They were the ones that were really intensively managing, but there was a new player in the game that nobody had really accounted for, including the managers, the scientists, everybody. So there was a bunch of studies done during that stretch about, okay, what happens if we institute coyote, if we start trapping coyotes, and
Yeah, it's always a push and pull, what you want your hunt experience to be like. Like even deer density, we're trying to plan what we want to do this fall, and we're always talking about like buck quality versus deer numbers, and it's like we're kind of going with the deer numbers because, kind of like we were talking about earlier, I'd love to shoot a big giant buck, but at the same time, I want to go have a good hunt. I want to see deer, have a good time. And so you just got to figure out what that is for you. And what you want to get out of your hunt or get out of your property, get out of your club, whatever the case may be.
I think that's one of the most important things is, anytime I'm contacted by a landowner, is saying, what should we do? The first question I always ask is, what do you want? Do you want numbers? Do you want trophy? Do you want opportunity to shoot a large one? Do you want your child to have a good time? And then number two, are all the major players on the same page? Whatever hunting leash you get into, they better have the same goals as you, or it's going to be a hard time.
Mm-hmm. Now, one of the last things I wanted to ask you is, what? You got something?
I was thinking about your club with the new restriction they just put on.
Which well, go ahead.
The SOA restriction.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Speak about that, like that balance between quality and numbers and all that. It's a fine line you got to walk. I'm sure you've worked with a bunch of landowners or have been in contact with landowners that started putting on maybe stricter antler restrictions to try to protect 2 and 3 year old deer, to try to harvest, deer that are hopefully 3, 4 plus years old. Have you seen success of them doing that based off using, instead of point restrictions, beam restrictions and spread restrictions?
I think you can. I think it depends upon where you are. You've got different antler characteristics in different regions. I think most hunters are going to have a hard time estimating beam length. You're in a position where it takes, sometimes you got to make some decisions pretty quickly. And that can be hard to do. So I think, I just think in general, antler restrictions are a tool that can be used. I think it's an imperfect tool like any other. You have, 8 points. It has to have 8 points. I've seen some beautiful 8-point 1.5-year-old deer. The folks over at Mississippi State have done a lot of this work. Bronson and Steve Damaris, and, in terms of the quality and just the disparity across Mississippi from, the Delta region, as you move east here towards Alabama, just huge differences in soil quality. So, one size does not fit all. But I have seen, there was a property I worked with that we really restricted, that it had been raped and pillaged prior to this landowner getting a hold of it. This is a big piece of property. And it was about 8,000 acres, and they really restricted for 2 years. They were growing some 180-inch deer.
What state?
This was Alabama.
Whoa!
Yes.
High fence or low?
This is no fence.
Okay.
I'm gonna tell you right now. Not, and this was good soils. This was good property. I'm not going to say anything about where it was, but they said, okay, we're going to restrict, and there's a lot of ways you can restrict this, but there's, at the end of the day, not everybody was on the same page. Part of the property was leased and this and that, and to get those folks that are leasing those and be like, this isn't working over in this 1,000 acres that's being leased. Just be aware. I can see the data. I can see what they're shooting. It's hard for deer hunters to resist shooting that 2-year-old, shooting that 3-year-old. We showed it with, the study that you referred to several times here in the state. We had brown-collared deer and we had orange-collared deer. The orange-collared deer were GPS. Please don't shoot an orange-collared deer. It's not a legal thing, but please don't. We wanted to get those data. If you've got a brown collar, shoot it whether you would or not. My phone would ring because my name's on the radio collar. Oh, we shot one of your orange-collared deer. We went and looked at the data. We did. We analyzed the data and we've published it. If it had large antlers, the probability of that orange-collared deer being shot was just as great as a brown-collared deer. I heard, I couldn't see the collar behind the tree. Really, the collar's right next to the chest. So that deer never moved the whole time. Another one was our son, he couldn't resist. We had told him not to. Well, it wasn't just those two. It was all over. It's that, I think that's the biggest thing with your point restrictions or whatever it is. Can you resist?
What did they implement to have success out there?
It was a voluntary. We advertised it on the ADC and our websites. We put it out there and just said, hey, we're studying this. We're hoping you don't shoot these. If you do, just let us know. But we're hoping you don't. That was all.
What restrictions did the landowner want to put in place, that y'all put in place to be able to grow that deer? Because after you said it was pretty much raped and pillaged.
They were talking age.
Like body.
Yeah, we were just saying, we want these deer to be 4 or older.
Okay.
Let's get them to 4 years old. However you decide it's a 4-year-old deer, let's get these to 4 or older.
Okay.
And so, but those 115-inch 2-year-old deer or 3-year-old deer were getting tagged.
Understandable.
Yeah.
It is. except he was shooting 150 inch and 170 inch off his part of the property that he was hunting. Mm-hmm. But but this is the other side of it. Mm-hmm. It might be that person's first deer, or you brought the kids hunting, or it's hard to really follow through on those things.
Yeah.
But if you're going to try to implement anything, body characteristics is probably the best way to.
I look at. I think everybody looks at different things. I think people look at body characteristics. I tend to take a look at antler bases, which I think is imperfect also. I think at the end of the day, if you can do a little bit to get some more mature deer out there, it's going to benefit your herd. And I think, whatever works for you. But if you read, the stuff out of Mississippi State, what works in this region isn't going to necessarily work in that region. So you have to know what's going to work on your property.
What are some research projects that maybe you have going on right now, or that other people have going on that you're excited about?
I have one that I'm super excited about, but I'm not going to tell you. We haven't told anybody.
Okay.
We'll be letting this loose here in about 6-8 months, probably a year. We'll probably be, for the first time, presenting data, making people aware of it, probably next February. Okay. It's the most exciting stuff I've been a part of. And it's an area that nobody's ever really studied before. Ooh. And I think people are going to go, say, why haven't we done that? And so maybe we need to do this again a year from now. And yes. I've got a graduate student working on that, but like I said, we just haven't publicized it. That I'm super excited about. I'm also really excited about seeing what happens with our deer research facility and a lot of the breeding success things that we're doing, and seeing how our what's being passed from one generation to the next, and how that translates, and those are the things that really excite me. But I guess the other one that I wasn't thinking about is we're doing some work with drones, estimating density with drones. If there's one thing deer biologists have done a really good job at, it's convincing the public that we're good at counting deer, despite the fact that we're not. I've actually gotten into some pretty heated arguments with some consultants out there, with them saying that I'm damaging their business by saying we can't count deer. And I'm like, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm being honest. We're not very good at it. I'm not saying your services aren't of value, but we're not good at counting deer. We've convinced the public that we are. Thermal drones look to be a game changer. The only issue is, can we scale up their range? But we're coming up with some density estimates in our deer research facility where we know the density of deer that are pretty dang good. So that excites me. And we haven't published the data yet, but those publications are going to be submitted here in the next probably 2 or 3 months.
That's very exciting.
So that's something else we'll have to talk about.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
There's so much.
Yeah, this is the first time we've ever had you on, and I'm like, man, why have we taken so long? This has been fantastic.
Yeah.
This has been fun.
How many episodes are we at now?
This might be in the 700s. I don't know. It depends on when we release it.
So how many viewers do you guys have?
Depends on how you count it.
So if we charge them $1 a piece, and we share that,
we could go grab a real nice property.
Listen, there's a naming opportunity for our deer research facility. Yep.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, we greatly appreciate your time today and spending some time with us. I know it's the first time you've ever met us in person, I think, because Andrew, you never had class.
Never took a class with you.
Yeah, but we really appreciate the time and opportunity, and I'm sure the viewers and the audience members out there have learned a lot, as we have on this episode, and very excited in the near future, hopefully be able to get you back on and have some other conversations with you. So we appreciate your time.
Well, I've enjoyed it. I appreciate the opportunity, and there's only one other thing to say, and that's War Eagle.
War Eagle.
Yeah. And all the listeners, viewers out there, thank y'all for watching the podcast and listening. We'll catch you back here on the next episode from the Southern Outdoorsmen. And remember, guys, y'all stay Southern.